Hello and welcome to Inflection Point Conversations. I'm Michelle Obeda. I'm a 3D artist and the host of this podcast. I'll be chatting with different people who are experts in various CGI fields. Together, we'll take a deep dive into one or more of the disruptive topics that have reached an inflection point in our industry. If you're enjoying this podcast, please take a moment to like, rate, and subscribe. You can also comment and give feedback. I'd love to reach more people and grow this amazing community. Today, I'm talking with Camila Cualla. Camila is a Colombian 3D artist, interior designer, and jewelry maker. While studying abroad in Barcelona, she worked at an architectural firm doing 3D renderings for competitions. She later moved to California to hone her 3D skills, and it was eventually a job offer at Mosso Studio that brought Camila to New York, where she had an amazing learning experience that also led her to work at some of the most prestigious archviz studios in the city. With experience working at Mosso, Neoscape, Binyan, iCrave, and Shimahara, which is where we met, Camila has learnt the ins and outs of 3D studio culture and has sharpened her artistic skills. These days, Camila is focusing her attention in Colombia, where she's founding her own interior design business and incorporating her passion for 3D art. Welcome, Camila.
Thank you. So good to
So
see
good.
you.
Good to have you here. I'm very excited. So, like I mentioned, we worked together at Shimahara some years ago, and yeah, we've both been at various ArcViz studios in
At
New
different
York and in Europe.
paces. Yeah.
I feel like we also have a lot of different ex-colleagues in common as well, which is really interesting. And what I really was interested for to do this episode of the podcast with you is rather than just talking about one topic, I really want to talk about a few different topics because every time we meet, we have a lot of different things to say. And I thought this is really interesting. So let's see what we get to. I mean, there's so many fascinating things in the ArcViz industry, in the 3D modeling world,
Yes.
the 3D art world, um, that affect a lot of people. And um, first of all, how are you doing? You're in Bogota and Colombia at the moment, right?
Yes, I'm in Bogota, escaping from the winter in New York.
Nice.
Getting to, navigate being back in Colombia. I'm gonna try to be in New York and Colombia because I still love New York, and I still love you, all my friends. But I also want to be closer to my family and I'm detaching a little bit of like the studio life, like the 3D
hmm
studio life, and want to start my own thing. But I definitely like every time I work on a 3D file, I do, I still enjoy it. I still love it.
hmm
I like, and we will talk about it later, but like the process of making things in 3D is still exciting for me. So I don't
Yeah.
think I'll quit 3D fully. It will be like a side gig for me.
Mm.
But yeah, no, I don't know the studio life. It's not.
Yeah.
And as
Yeah.
you said, I wanted so I work in so many different studios in the city that I think I had my fair share.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally know what you mean. When you're also working somewhere for a while, for a few years, or you're going from studio to studio, you can feel like this is all there is, or like this is all you know, like this is where everything is like. And then if, for example, you start working freelance, or like you're doing your sort of starting a couple of different businesses, I imagine that you start to realize, well, there's like a different way of working, and there's a different way of like spending your day, right?
Yes. And to organize yourself and like what you invest. Like for me right now, is investing time in my family is a top priority.
hmm
Um, and I feel like also like depends on our life stages.
Mm.
Like I'm getting closer to 40, so my priorities have shifted. Versus like some other like colleagues that we have, they're like starting more like their professional life, so they have different interests. So I
Yeah.
think that's also part of it.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that I want to talk about with you if we get to it on this episode today. But the first thing I want to talk to you, which I described, so I kind of like laid out a few different topic points that we talked about. One of them is I called it too much 3D. I want to use my hands.
Yes.
And this is
Um,
like, I guess I can summarize it as a lot of different friends of ours, including you and I, when we're working full time in 3D and have been doing it for so long, have other side interests and projects that are, I guess, tangible physical things. And
yes.
okay, so example for me is drawing and painting. I love drawing with ink. I love painting. I've been doing watercolor classes, and um, I feel like the balance of doing something physical with your hands balances out living your life in a 3D software program.
Absolutely. And as I was saying, I feel like the process of modeling is still interesting, but at the same time, like I want to be able to touch the things I create.
Yeah. So
So I
tell
do
me about your
earrings.
jewelry business.
So Michelle has earrings and I have earrings too. I've been like I started doing this like a few years back, and it's been like a great creative outlet because like it's shapes, it's colors, it's mixing things, it's like I think because of my 3D background, I've been able to like um sort of like how do you say it? Like hone better the
Mm-hmm.
sewing sort of thing
Yep.
because I understand where to like the threading and like these little like I think when you start modeling and when you're in 3D world, there's a like a train of thought that you develop, and I think in the like for me has worked great for my earrings and my jewelry side gig, but also like really feel something tangible because sometimes I feel like, and I feel like I'm one of the weird ones in the 3D world that I'm like, I'm not that crazy about VR. And I think it's because it freaks me out because we can create whatever world we want. We have that skill set. So I
Mm-hmm.
think being able to create that crazy world so intangible for me, it's like I need to go back. And like for instance, I'm like doing jewelry, but like in Colombia I have a garden. So it's like I've been like gardening and like growing my own vegetables. And like all these tangible things have become
Mm-hmm.
super important to me. And maybe it's a way
Yeah.
of grounding myself. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. It's also interesting you brought up VR because it feels almost like the opposite of, being in a garden and putting your hands in the soil. With VR, I think people who love VR and creating virtual worlds are trying to recreate the physical feeling, right? And in a way, there's something beautiful about that. Like, let's say you live in a high-rise dense city and you don't have access to a garden, being able to put on a VR headset and someone has like taken the time to like translate that feeling is great. But if you have the option to go in the garden or to sit inside and put a headset on and be in the garden,
Yeah.
um, then you're probably going to choose the garden.
Yeah, and exactly to your point, like when you don't have access to those things, it definitely
Mm,
becomes like important. I
mm,
think for me, the because we can create those worlds, for me, it freaks me out a bit.
mm. Oh, is it like it's too real?
It's too real, and it's like, you know, like before like going to Mosul, like I was in California and I work a lot like on my own on my projects and trying to like develop skills, whatever. And I remember it was always like, oh, my dream house, my dream kitchen. So I have like 10 dream kitchens. And I
Hmm.
and it's like this alternative reality that I can build. So I think for me, like really the tangible part has become very important.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I have another friend, she's like a crazy great modeler. She's now into ceramics and she does
Hmm.
amazing things. So I think it's like there's a need to like canalize this energy that we can create with our hands, but also like really create with our hands, not with a
Yes.
keyboard and a mouse.
Yes. Yes. Um, I noticed it myself when I was using, the 3D lathe tool, when you can give something a lathe. And I think I knew the word lathe from 3D before I realized that that's what the actual carpentry tool is. When you're making like a table
Oh,
leg in wood, it turns it. It's called a lathe, and you actually make. So that's like the physical thing. And I saw it on there's this like TV show I've been watching that's like home renovations, and there's a guy who's a carpenter, and it just, I mean, I haven't done it physically, but I just really want to make it by hand because like it's so easy to do in 3D, and it's obviously
yes.
not easy to do in physical term. It makes me want to like master that, which is so funny, this urge. So this is the thing. I think when we were talking about the inflection point, we were saying how it's a bit like there's a burnout with CGI artists who they're facing that they're tired of 3D and want to go into. But do you think it's that? Do you think it's like I want to leave 3D and I want to do tangible work? Or do you think it's like I need a balance to do the two at the same time?
I think a balance because like many times I'm like, oh, I'm done with 3D. And then I'm like, oh, but I open 3D Max and I'm like, I feel like my eyes glow. And I'm like, oh my God, like turbo smooth. Let's do a good model of something. Like I've always enjoyed modeling little things here and there. Um, and I think like both ways. So quick like short story, like I got a house in Colombia, I remodeled it, and that was a very interesting process because I modeled the house in 3D. I completely flipped the house and I did the model on 3D. So I was
Mm,
able to see like all the different options. And then I will talk to like the people who were working in the house and I was like, that's so easy. Well, like, why are you not like, how can you not see what I'm seeing? And I think also
mm,
that again, like that train of thought is very important for us, but at the same time, like we have a skill that it would be
mm.
great to be able to use it in more in real life. So
Yeah.
I think doing it with our hands, doing it like with art, with earrings, with ceramics, it is a way to download the like that knowledge and those skills
Yeah.
and like really like yeah, find that balance that we need because we're always stuck to a screen. Like I don't know for you, COVID was so intense. I was like
Mm,
24/7 on. I'm in New York and I didn't even have a balcony like many of us. And it
yeah.
was like, oh, I need to get out. Like I love
Yeah.
you 3D, but I hate you sometimes too. So I
Yeah.
think that
Yeah.
that need is
Yeah.
that crave is real.
That's so true. Actually, I mean, during COVID, I started camping. Like I went with some colleagues of mine, ex-colleagues now, and it's like we all realized like we just need to be outside. We need to be like in it was the complete opposite of everything, 3D and all of the home comforts. And I feel like I think that balance worked quite well. Like on a weekend, we'd go, hiking and camping and sleeping in a tent and swimming in a river. And then you come back
That
and it makes it
sounds
okay to
beautiful.
spend the week. Yeah. And then it makes it okay to spend the week on the computer. So I think maybe that balance is quite a good one to try and hit.
Yeah, and maybe we can like reformat the question is like too much 3D, I want to use my hands, plus how do I find balance in the 3D
Mm.
world and like like yeah, what grounds me or like what levels it up? Maybe
Hmm.
that's part of the conversation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's interesting, and definitely would love to speak about this more at some point because um, different examples of like of how to get that balance, right? Another topic that I want to talk to you about, and this is obviously this is prescient, this is relevant for so many people. I've called it "Where are all the women?"
I don't know.
Where are all the women? And now this is funny because in my experience, I've worked in many different studios, and I have so many amazing colleagues and ex-colleagues who are women in the archivist industry. And I think maybe you have the same
Yes.
experience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like in many studios, I think Binion and Shimahara were like we were all women, like there were two guys. And I have to say, I love when we all team up and like I think and I don't I'm of course I don't want to be like gender biased, but I think like we can organize and push things through in a different way.
Hmm.
But like when we team up as women and we hold each other and like we lift each other, it can be great.
Hmm.
We can also be awful to each other in some moments, which is awful. But when you find that great balance, I think it is so amazing. And then to your point, is like where are all these amazing people we work with?
Yeah, so the I guess the weird conflict is I know so many amazing 3D artists. I've worked with so many female 3D artists, and yet when there are judging panels, when there are conferences, when there are people highlighted, it seems to be mostly men, right? And this is, I mean, this is like one of the reasons that I've been interested in doing this podcast. Is I've been really interested to like to talk to, but also maybe to give some space and voice to people who we don't typically see all the time, just to show because I'm experiencing like so many interests, like let's say diversity, right? So we're talking about gender diversity, but also like cultural diversity, racial diversity. There, there should obviously definitely be more, but I feel like people aren't seeing what's already there. And I think you need to see people. So, for example, I feel so encouraged when I see these amazing, experienced women in our industry. I feel like now I feel like I can do it, right? Like you
Yes,
can't see it. You need to see it to be it, right? That's like a phrase.
absolutely.
Right. And so it's weird that, so I don't know the statistic of how many women versus men there are in ArcViz because when people do surveys, it's really geared also towards who's answering the survey, right? Um,
Yes.
and I mean, I've heard the statistic of something like 15% women, which is crazy, but I think
I
that
don't think
doesn't
that's
commute
real.
to me. I don't think that's
No.
real either because in my experience, so many women, right? Um,
And I feel like
so
also, sorry to cut you off. Like, what about like that statistic is like only 3D artists? Because I feel like there are a lot of components to make like companies and projects move forward.
mm,
So from creative director, creative lead to project managers, but like even if you're a project manager, you to a degree you need to understand how it's our workflow and all these things. So to a degree, you're part of the art biz, right?
mhm,
So are these people also joining like the crowd of like we are in the 3D world because all that expertise does push us all forward. But I hear
mm,
you, like 15%, that sounds quite low. And your experience and mine has been like we've shared our work with so many women that are
mm,
so talented in so many different areas.
mm.
So I think it's a good we could do a little bit of research on that.
Yeah, recently, and I mean like a few months ago, I saw there was like the D2 conference in, I think it's in Vienna, and there was a speaker panel or there was a judge panel, and it was all men. And someone on LinkedIn wrote this whole piece about it, which was kind of interesting. She wrote something, and a lot of people commented and was like talking about this is crazy. All these different women saying like, how come you didn't even ask any women? And I think the organizer said we did. They said no, which is kind of mental. And I don't think that's true. But also, there are some people who were applying. Oh, I run a studio, and we hardly get any women who are applying. And I think this is an interesting thing because when I've applied for jobs, if I look at if the studio and I look on their website, I can take a lot from what I see on the website. So,
Absolutely.
first of all, you look at the people, right? And if all of the people at the top, the managers, the directors, if they're all men, I feel very like I don't really want to work there. Then
Same.
I've also experienced, and I don't know if this is still the case, but there are studios and some like top studios in the UK. Their studio culture page was men in the gym,
I know, and like the beer thing, like it's such
beards,
a
and like
manly
working out.
culture. Like for me, I don't want beer is not a benefit. Thank you for the beer. I appreciate it. It's not a benefit. I think that might be more enticing and targeting men. And I
Mm.
feel like that like bro culture for us to apply to a job is really discouraging
Yeah,
because and I also like I've experienced like micromanagement from women and from men, which is very discouraging. But I think if I'm gonna be bossed around or micromanaged by a man, I really am not gonna sign up for this by choice.
Yeah, rather the bad news came from a woman. Um,
Yes.
well, it's like, yeah, definitely the bro culture and definitely like the all male leadership. And I know from my experience, like if someone says, I don't know why there's no women in this company who are not applying to this company. If I see that they're all men there, I wouldn't want to apply there either. So I think that there is, I mean, this is a big topic of conversation with like diversity, equity, inclusion being like
Yes.
a thing that, in the US is being basically put in the trash.
Yes.
This is the need for inclusion and diversity is so big, and um, what's what's fascinating to me is that there is more diversity than people are seeing, which is kind of annoying. And
Ye-
if you
yes.
see it more, if you have more people, like if you have more women who are directors, more women would want to apply, and you'll have a bigger range of skill set. Like so you'll have more people, you'll have more skilled artists to hire, right?
Yes. Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I work also like at a studios that men are leadership and they would have women in like supposedly like a power position. But then they really don't have that freedom or authority to do things. They always have to check with the men. And it's rule like the mindset is different. The way they like we navigate things differently. Um, we like I feel like between women we can protect each other. Like I was once in a harassment issue with someone, and my female supervisor, I think she was lead by her male to like boss, and it wasn't as supportive as me and other people in the studio needed to be, especially women,
Mm.
because we were threatened by a guy. And I feel like even these dynamics can play a role in like, will I apply or not? And like, what is
Mm-hmm.
the real? Because in photos we all look great. Like you can see like the culture photo of like everyone having fun, but like, what is the real culture people and women are dealing with in these environments?
Yeah.
So and like once you start like if you ask questions around, like if you were to ask like, okay, if I were with the window, uh, was this good? Was a good experience or not? And then you can start really understanding a little bit of the culture and how it um yeah, how it affects. I feel like after working in so many studios at this point, I do try to research a little bit more of the culture more than many
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
because it's gonna where I'm gonna be spending so much time of my life, and I want to be
Yeah.
safe. I want to have a great environment, not just like a great learning curve or whatever. Like it always comes to
Has to.
like everything comes together.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think, yeah,
That's an interesting question, actually. I wanted to ask if there's like for female artists who are looking for a company that they want to work at, right? If you're like, I got a job offer or I'm looking for a job and here are some different places, what could they look for to, how do you think people can, because you can't know the studio culture unless you've experienced it, unless you know someone who works there and recommends it. That's a big thing. Word of mouth
yes,
recommendations are a big thing. And it's a huge thing in our like tiny industry because it's actually it's so small that, all the places I've worked, people have asked me like, do you recommend this studio? Do you recommend this person? And word of mouth is really trusted. If you don't have that, how can someone tell?
I have no
Um,
idea.
TBD. I guess maybe we need a little Reddit thread of
I
like,
think sometimes it's like Glassdoor and these sort of like sources.
hmm.
Um,
Glassdoor is the website where people can write reviews of places
yeah,
they've
but
worked, right?
then yeah, but I think it's like to a degree it can be BS. Sorry for my French. But but many like one time I put a honest review about one of the studios I work with, and immediately I guess they asked someone to be like, oh, please say we're the best.
Oh, yeah, interesting. So they're trying to
So
neutralize
yeah,
the
because
public
it's sort of
opinion.
like a marketing-ish niche
Mm-hmm.
that they need to take care of too. So I think it's like I feel like it would be so great to actually be able to have like a network where you can be honest and be like, this studio was great in A, B, C, and D, but these things were hard. So it's like up to you if you're willing
Mm.
to take that or not. But like to actually have like a honest place. And also
Mm-hmm.
like I feel like it also would be great like for companies to actually listen to feedback, which I think
Mm.
that they also don't do it.
No, I mean, I don't think I know any company who really wants to understand your feedback. Like
Yeah,
they might say, tell us in your review, but in your review where we're going to review you too, but also we're not going to act on this, necessarily.
no.
I
So I think that I feel
yeah.
like we could also like to a degree put like into the question is like how the transparency communication actually works and like because this applies to friendship, romantic relationship or whatever. It's like, are you really willing to listen to feedback, which is hard.
Yeah.
And I think it's hard also for me, like sometimes it's hard to like get feedback from someone I don't admire,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
like if someone like is not cannot do what I do and then it's like, oh, but you're not doing this right, it's like, how dare you? you
Yeah.
know, like
You don't have the authority to tell me. Yeah. Yeah.
yes, or like I think for me, I think many of the things I've done is like I admire the people I work with.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a respect thing. And I hope it's reciprocated. And I think that also can happen, like because of power dynamics and many things. Also, it's sometimes it's easier between women.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, yeah, I feel like I'm getting to get more questions about this subject than answers. I'm sorry.
Well, no, but I mean, the point isn't to have the answer, right?
Yeah.
Because if you had the answer, I think we would have solved it already.
Yes.
But there are lots of questions. But I think that there are lots of I think there's so much positive points of having like in my experience and probably in your experience, like all the women that I've worked with, I'm just fascinated why people aren't taking more advantage of the skills that, and I don't mean to generalize. Obviously, there's as many differences between women as there are between men and women, right?
Yeah.
And that's just another reason why, like, hiring diversity, right? So like people with different cultural backgrounds, with different educational backgrounds, different like experience, as well as like gender and racial background. We haven't even got to that. I feel like that's
Oh
another
my God.
topic that it's a very white industry,
It's a very white industry.
and that's like it's very discouraging for everyone to see, and I'm sure especially for people of color. Like that's kind of it's not
Yeah,
very
how am I
inclusive.
gonna how am I gonna get the food in there? Like
Yeah.
it's hard.
But interestingly, when I meet people, different ethnic backgrounds who are like amazing at 3D, I really want to like. Well, but I always ask them on the podcast because I really want to like talk to them, but also like I think it's good to like have more faces who are. So this is another thing, like judging panels. So when you see like who's in our industry, there are a few of these prestigious like awards and different conferences, right? There's like a handful of them everyone knows.
Yeah.
When you look at the judging panel, that is the most telling thing to me about like what are we doing here, right? Like if
There's
it's
no
all men on the judge,
representation.
if there's no representation, I kind of don't care because I also think there's no representation of the kind of 3D art that they're judging. So, I think if everyone looks a little the same, the images are going to be the same kind of images. And this is like
Yeah.
typically true. This is like the whole point of diversity in a company is that you have different people with different outlooks, different aesthetic, sensitivities and things appealing to different people. So
Which
important.
also applies to clients.
Yeah.
So which because I've also experienced that so many studios. But like when you are only tailoring to this certain group, you're only using this certain like style from like a certain group of people. we end up with all the same images everywhere.
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
Like,
And and it's true. So the diversity of the artists in your studio is reflected in the diversity of the artistic style that you produce, right? And so it's
absolutely.
even more important to hire people, different kinds of people, and in many different ways, right? Like, I think different countries is really interesting. I think when everyone comes from the same country, they'll have a very similar background of aesthetics. I think
Yes.
educational background, like if you just hire people who studied architecture, for example, that's very one side, even though they're not all the same. But if you hire
Yeah.
people who, like, for example, I worked in a company and one of my colleagues had studied theatre design. And so she came to ArchViz
Cool.
as with this like theatrical
I can
sensitivity,
only
which is
think about
like,
like the lighting. That would be such a
yes,
cool lighting
yeah,
experience.
yeah, the lighting, the drama, the story that you put into
Yes.
an image. It was like, oh, because you studied that. That's so cool. And then you have someone else who did fashion, right? And like her way of seeing fabrics, it was, like I think fabrics are a big part of CGI, right? Especially when that's like one of the more difficult things to make look realistic. And when you do, they stands out a lot. And her sensitivity to fabrics really
Was
made an image.
amazing.
And I mean, it made her like, one of the best people in the industry in London. These are my friends, and if you know who you are, um,
Yay.
um, but like these different backgrounds are like, add to like what a company. So, you have a studio, let's say you have 10 artists. Oh, okay, we have difficult fabric to make. Let's give it to her. We need someone to make this look more dramatic. Let's get their eyes on it. Like these skill share, so important.
And I was gonna say also like towards what you're saying, I think it's like in this 3D world, we all have so many different skill set. I might be great at, I don't know, styling, and you might be great at dramatic lighting. That doesn't make us better than any of us. It's like we all should like be able to work together and make amazing stuff. But I think many times they like put you in a box where you have to check,
Mm.
check, check, check. And even if you have other skills to put on the table, they're not being taken in account because that's not what they want. Because the style is like this. We're a rigid
Mm.
box.
Yes.
So,
Do you know you've brought up a very interesting point is when studios want every artist to be good at everything and that you can only be like, quite good at most things because
mhm.
you can't be amazing at every single element of our job. And so I think a really smart manager of a rendering studio would be to hire the variety of different people and use their skills. Now, I think in my experiences, there's often been this weird conflict between, shall we get, like you said, like let's use the different people for their different specialities and work together. Like that's actually like not an easy thing to do when you're
No.
managing a team, but it's so good if you get that right. And I think that that's a big thing in like hiring because people maybe want, I want this person who makes the most, stunning standout images. Okay, you hire someone who makes stunning standout images, but they're terrible to work with and they're always, taking too much time on it and they're like, they don't
Or
they
they
don't
have
take any
messy
feedback.
files.
Messy files.
Oh
I
my
thought you could
God.
say massive egos. Massive
Also,
egos, messy
also
files.
that. I work with a person who had both, and that was a nightmare.
Messy files are my
Messy
nightmare.
files and a massive ego, that's not a great cocktail.
I've definitely no. I maybe we're talking about the same person. No, I mean I'm sure there's many people who have that
Yes.
description. But is that person going to be super valuable in your company? Like, how much do you value the stunning image that goes on the website? Well, how many of them are you making in a year, in a month?
And I remember in one of the 3D meetups in New York, um, a studio owner said something like, sometimes I see images that I don't like, and that's fine because I'm not always the client. And I remember
Mhm.
I love that so much because we circle back to what we were saying, like so many times many companies are just like a box, like this is what we
Mhm.
produce. And it's like, no, your clients are different, your people who are working are different, and everyone has such a different skill set. Like
Mm.
personally, like I like exterior images, they are not my forte. I love interior because I'm an interior designer, I love interior images. It shouldn't be like a checklist.
Yes.
Like you need to master thing when I'm good at some, like then I can do
Yeah.
these images. I can do the other ones too, but I enjoy these ones more. And if you enjoy exteriors more, or if you enjoy, I don't know, so many different things that we can
Mhm.
do, why not exploit that?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And also keep people motivated because I feel like those checklists and all those boxes, I feel like that's we were gonna talk about a little bit like when we hit the like
The glass ceiling.
the glass ceiling. I think that can be part of for me. I think that can be part of the glass ceiling, like when they put you in a box.
Okay, this comes perfectly to our third topic that I think we have time to do today. Is there a glass ceiling when you reach senior artist level, right? Um, and I think that you put it really well, and there's something that you're also alluding to, which is I think when you have experience, when you have a lot of experience in the industry, you start to really understand what you like to do. And so, yeah, I mean, the inflection point, this is something that I was finding in the last couple of years, and I definitely experienced this myself too. Many senior artists being out of work, right? Um, and where can artists go after being a senior artist? So, for anyone who doesn't know, in typical Archviz studios, there's sort of like junior artists, mid artists, senior artists, and then there are people who are art directors, creative directors. There are also project managers, which are kind of parallel. It's a different job. People don't typically move from the art to product managing, though you
No.
can. In some bigger companies, there's technical directors. And then, the CEO pretty much like these Archviz studios aren't normally that big. And so you don't have that many positions. So
Yes.
when you've been in industry for, let's say, 7 years, that's just the number I'm putting out, 7 years, and you've gone to become a senior artist, and maybe you work as a senior artist for a couple of years, then what? This is really interesting. So I had this question to myself, and I wanted to be, this is years ago, I wanted to become an art director. I'm also interested in art direction and also interested in managing people, which art direction is both the art and the direction, right? So the direction part is all about communication. I found it interesting. And I got into art direction. I was lucky that there was, space for that in the company I was working at, and I got to learn it a lot. But then when the economy went bad and, we all lost our jobs like over a year ago, um, you can't apply for an art director job unless there's one available, and there's not many art directors.
No. How
Also,
many art
the
directors do they need?
no, right? And actually, like, if you're going down to the bare bones of your company, if you have, maybe you can keep one art director, but probably you get rid of them if you don't have enough money. So that becomes a tough thing for people with enough years of experience. So when you hit like 12 years experience, 15 years experience, where do you go from that? And this is a lot of
You
people,
go to Colombia. No, I think that's a great question
Mm,
because where do we go? Like, I feel like that's when many people, and like people like at Mosso, I think that's what Martin did. Like he reached a point where he was very senior. What am I gonna do? And he started his own studio. And then
hmm
he's like, how many little studios are out there?
hmm
And I feel like when I work at Mosso, I had to wear many different hats, which I loved. But at the same time, it's like because you're such a small studio, you have to wear many hats. Then sometimes you don't necessarily go deeper into certain areas.
hmm
Or
Yes.
when you are like in a bigger studio, it's like you hit like the ceiling, the glass ceiling because you're not gonna go over your supervisor or they're
hmm
not gonna open a position for you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know, where do we go?
Yeah. So this is it's an interesting thing that, a lot of my ex-colleagues, so people that, I started working with, I've been working with in my 20s and my 30s, around the age of the mid 30s is when you have enough experience that you're more than a senior artist, right? As in you're doing more stuff, or you're ready to do more stuff and you have the drive. At the same time, there's other younger artists who are also becoming senior artists who probably are on a lower salary than you. So a company would weigh
Oh
up,
my
why am
gosh.
I paying the senior artist? So this is
Yes.
right. So how do you justify, and how do you justify your salary? And like living costs get higher, you want to get paid more as the years go on. How could companies appreciate your experience without just, at the age of 40, we don't need you anymore, And this is a lot of ex-colleagues of mine. I've been seeing what everyone's doing, and it's like you either leave and go freelance, you either leave and start your own studio, like you said, your ex-boss. You you leave the industry and go to something else. Um, or you may be lucky enough to become a director, but that's so rare because there is already a director there, and they're not unless they leave, there isn't another position for that. So it becomes this very difficult thing where I have friends who are asking, like, why can't I be a 3D artist, a senior 3D artist, until I retire, like for the rest of my career? We're not retiring at
Yes.
40. We're not earning that kind of
No,
salary.
I wish.
So
And also I think there's something that you are not, and I think part of like in that realm of issues, we also have like the new factor that after COVID, working remote is so easy. So people can hire amazing artists abroad for a third
mm,
of the salary that we need in New York to survive.
yes.
So how do we, because, and also like that's tricky because like when we live in New York and we have exposure to certain things, lifestyle, we have access to so many different things that maybe someone abroad might not have access to. That's a value that we put, like we give to the company, to the images, to the culture, to everything. And then they go hire people who are cheaper because they live in cheaper places of the world. And that's then we're also starting to compete with that. So it's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
if you're
yeah.
senior and you need a New York salary, like just talking about New York, or I can imagine London is similar. Like you need a salary, like you need the cost of living
It,
is super expensive.
yes.
How do you compete with people who are good and they cost a third of what you
Mm.
need to be able to survive? It's not like we're gonna have like luxury lives. I
Yes,
don't think any
yes,
of us do in New York as 3D
yeah,
artists.
yeah,
Um, so I
yeah.
think all those scenarios are not helping us.
Yes.
And how do we
That's
come out
it.
of that?
Yeah. So yeah, that I feel like that's been a really prescient topic, and I've talked about it with a couple of people. This idea of um remote work. So remote work has so many pluses and so many minuses, right? And one of the bonuses has been like people can change their lifestyle. People, I think a really great thing. So two sides of the story is that people who live in areas that are not big cities that don't have a lot of architecture happening can now work in these great archivist studios or architecture studios because they can work remotely, right? So people around the world. Like I used to work with a guy who was in Brazil, and he wasn't in one of the main cities. And he was like, the options were really small until I was able to work for a big company that went fully remote. And I'm like, that's great. That is an amazing opportunity for people who don't live in big cities. That is
Yes.
also very difficult for someone who does live in the big city, who has to now justify their salary against someone who may be just as skilled, but they're asking for half the salary that I'm asking for. This creates a tension, and I feel it's always very easy. The first thing we do is want to blame the person who's charging less money, but it's not their fault. Like they're not asking for less than they need. They just need less
Yeah.
because of the cost of living. So I remember thinking that the solution was for me to find a job where they can appreciate me personally in person. What do you need?
Yes,
What can I bring to you in person? Um, and I know that studios, I feel like a lot of studios are coming back into in-house. They're asking for artists in-house, which is now going back to being beneficial for people in the cities, not beneficial for people outside of the big
abroad.
cities. So
Mm-hmm.
this is, or even just like, far away that they can't commute to the office, or they have,
Yeah.
childcare or family care, like all of these things that was good for in.
Or
It's
simply
very
space.
difficult, that balance.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you find that balance in the real world with and then I feel like we go back to what we were talking earlier, is like the need to find your personal balance and like the your environment, and then being able to afford that
Yeah,
without sacrificing your mental health or many
yeah,
other things. So I
yeah.
think I think it's very tricky. And then I feel like also I feel like many companies have played like a card of giving images for cheaper. So they have destroyed smaller studios. So
Hmm.
people cannot afford real like an artist's salary.
Hmm.
So I feel like maybe it's like a loyalty thing that we should have is as a community of like I don't know, having average like like CG architect when they did when they do like the salary um
Mm. The
how do
survey.
the survey. I don't know how many people answered. I've been answering for many years.
Yeah,
Um
I always read it and I never answer. That's terrible.
you see.
I
But
hate
I
doing
think it's
surveys.
I do love surveys. It's so weird. But I think it that maybe could be something that we as a community like have a conversation about of how not to stab each other in the back and how to we
Hmm.
all keep growing and have certain standards of like prices, benefits. I don't know.
Yeah, a few weeks ago I talked with Taras Kvitka, who's the CEO of a Ukrainian company. They have a studio in London too. It's called Marigold, and we were talking all about price and quality, right? And his thought was that there would be studios who would be competing for the lower, like there's studios around the world, companies around the world who are just competing to who can charge cheaper. They would be the bottom ones, and then there'll also be the ones at the top who can charge whatever they want, like Mir and those kind of companies who they have the reputation that people will pay for those. And it's very
Yes.
weird, very difficult for the people in between, where like you don't want to compete for the lowest price.
No.
But it's just a reality of the market of being able to like even if people want you in house, everyone is looking for, every studio I've ever worked at has looked for a studio of artists in another country, that a lower salary country, right? And it's I guess it's just difficult, like it's, but coming back to the idea of the glass ceiling and the senior artist, I think another aspect of this is, as an individual, as an artist, when you reach the point you've been a senior artist for a few years and you're faced with this option of like, how do I continue to grow, like and I think most studios struggle to nurture their artists. How do you think people could do better? Like, what are some options that you think like it would be good if you had this possibility or
I think I will still circle back to what we were talking about, like hone your skills, not like
mm-hmm,
standardize everyone, because I
mm-hmm,
think everyone has something to offer.
yeah,
And when you put people in boxes, you might just block them or cut like their wings to put it in words. So I think if there was like a way to everyone embrace like the different skill set that
mm-hmm,
you bring to table, how we can team up and grow, I think that would be great.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I think that might help to a degree.
I think that's also a little bit related to the size of the studio, right? Like if you have 6 people in your studio or you have 10 people in your studio, in an ideal world, you'll have a handful of people who can do a bit of everything, like 3D generalists. Then you'll have the
Yeah.
people who are specialized. Someone's specialized in lighting, someone specialized in interiors and fabric, someone who specializes in like, the concept images and the drama, and there's all these different aspects. That's an ideal world that like is very hard to achieve if you're running a company, right? Like,
Yeah.
the reality is that you might need, because let's say there's three people who can do a bit of everything. Well, if they're all busy and you need someone else to put on a project like that, suddenly a person who just is great at lighting
Needs to
can't,
do
do
landscaping, whatever.
materials.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like that's not very useful. So like there's a bit of a conflict there because I suppose you'd have to work in a big studio in a big company. Like for example, when I was in video games, I was working at Rockstar Games. It's a huge company. People were so specialized, and you could really just. And I suppose this is very similar to people who work in like big animation studios, and to a lesser degree VFX. I know because that's a bit more transitionary, shorter term kind of jobs, and the
Yeah.
VFX industry is suffering. Um,
Yes.
but if you can work in a huge company as an artist, you can sit with your like very specialized skills and just become a master of that one thing.
But you can't.
Right, you can't in arc viz, right? Like in
No. And I feel like also one thing I was gonna say, like it's every studio has like a different workflow, and
hmm
every client brings to the table different problems
hmm
or ideas or whatever. So it's like many people model from scratch. Many people take SketchUp files. Many people, they're like, oh, I have this project in the moon and I need you to design it. And people will develop the whole project in the moon. And I feel like also, what are what's the way you work and how you could be good at those different scenarios? Because not everyone's good at every scenario.
hmm Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and this is also an interesting thing is let's say one of the real positive benefits of having a really experienced artist, someone with 15 plus years experience, 20 years experience, is that they will have experienced so many different ways to solve a problem that I think companies are really doing a disservice to themselves of getting rid of their, people who are in their 40s, in their 50s,
yeah.
because they'll know how to work with a bunch of different people because they've worked in many places. Things that, when you're junior, when you're in your 20s and your early 30s, but you haven't come across before. And so I think that in my ideal scenario is that if companies they had another role that was above senior artist, so the specializing thing is one really great opportunity, right? A good example, if that was possible. Another one is if there was like something that was like, I don't know, super duper 3D artist. That's a bad name. I'm not a good branding person. But if there was like, some other kind of like, these are all just words, right? Like your titles are just words. But if you had people who are really experienced, maybe they can take on some other kind of like management aspect, like half of
And
your work was
mentoring.
management, mentoring, yeah,
I don't
and
think
problem
everyone
solving.
yes, I don't think everyone's good at mentoring, and that's
hmm
fine. Not everyone's good at project managing. Like, so again, like, what are your skills and what are the skills you can put on the table? And yes, to your point, when you have experienced artists that have been on the field for so many years and have encountered so many different kind of fires, you want them
hmm
on your side.
Yeah, for sure. Like because they really, when someone asks me something that I have experienced before, like let's say it's with a Max file, and like we're having this
It's
issue.
not
Have you seen this
opening.
before? You're like, I have seen that before and I've seen it many times and I kind of know how it's so satisfying. And you think,
Yes.
imagine getting rid of all the people who know how to like solve problems. Like you just end up like reinventing the wheel every time.
Yes.
Um and
And
the and
also,
mm.
oh, sorry, keep going.
I just wanted to say, to counterbalance this, there's so much we can learn from young artists as well. So I think it's also bad to have blinders where you say like, like I know what I'm doing. I don't want to learn something new.
No.
Absolutely not.
And,
But
and and I feel like especially like young artists are so I guess because generational wise they were like they grew up with so much more technology than we did. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like different. Like we
Mm-hmm.
have Katya as an example. Like she's such a genius in her art and like just developing her own, like learning her own things. And like I really admire her. Like, oh my God.
Yeah. So anyone who hasn't seen Katya FedEx, I had her episode is, um, e- I think is episode 15 of season 2. Go back and watch that.
She's amazing.
Yes.
And at the same time, like senior artists might have like can be more efficient in certain other areas.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yeah.
think
The
experience,
range.
the range is very important. And I feel like the range to all of us, like carry different generations and growing as an industry would be super important to have too.
Yeah, and I guess that
So
comes back to the diversity that we were talking about. You know, age diversity is a huge thing, and it's such a benefit. Like again, to have different people on your team and on your side. It's also on a personal level, looking after your workers, your employees. You know, like we're all humans. We all have lives. We need to, we need to earn enough money to live and survive before we're able to retire. And not looking after your artist up to retirement is a real problem in our industry. And I mean, I hope that like people have more solutions. I know that the archviz industry is actually quite young as an industry, and maybe they haven't figured out how to make that happen.
yeah, and it's something that I just like maybe I'll leave this question lingering for the like next time, but it's like
Hmm.
now that I'm thinking about it, I don't have many of coworker like female coworkers that have kids.
Hmm.
And I wonder if like what's happening with that too.
Yeah, childcare, like the ability to incorporate. I mean, I do have a few, and they've really had to fight against the tide. Had to explain themselves when they've had to like leave the office on time, not even early, on time to collect their children. Or you know what, I need to leave for 2 hours, but I can stay 2 hours later after that. You know, flexibility. During the pandemic, I had a thought that so two of my old colleagues and I we were like we had this idea to start a business, and it would be three female owned, archivist studio, and we're going to be super flexible for everyone. This is going to be amazing. We didn't do it in the end. I stayed in New York, and we all had different jobs, but the idea is great because when you nurture that flexibility and you nurture the other needs, the human needs of your artist, you can get so much more. I'm saying this
So
because I
much
hope.
more.
So
Yeah,
this is
I
something to end it on. This is like a final
yeah.
thought to end the episode. But you know, people can really like take, you know, make good use of your people. We're here. We have so much to offer. And I hope that, I mean, obviously all the studio leads around the world are listening to this podcast.
But also like I hope we like bringing these questions onto the table, like we can connect with other people who might have them and like we can maybe
Mm.
all brainstorm and help the industry move forward with like gender diversity, age diversity, culture,
Yeah.
everything. Um, and
Yeah.
just keep growing and make
Yeah.
it good for everyone, young
Yeah.
and
I'd love.
older and senior season, whatever. That
Yeah.
would be great.
Yeah. So I feel like we have so much more other things to talk about, which would be another episode. And I'd love to call these like a kind of like a mini series of, chats. But um I would love anyone who's listening to this who feels like they have other things to add that are other interesting points, or who have experienced the stuff that we've been talking about. Please get in touch. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to talk with you. And I think talking about this more is really important, but also I think it brings so many like possible solutions to mind, right? Like, um, I feel like we're problem solvers. Like, archivists artists are problem solvers. Um, I think women can be really great problem solvers, and I think let's put our minds together and we can fix everything.
We can. Thank you for having me, Michelle.
Thank you so much for coming to the podcast, Camilla. It's been fantastic. And
For me as
where
well.
can people find your jewelry? Have you got like a website up yet?
Ooh. Yeah, I have a Colombian website. I'm working on my New York website, so I can give that to you soon. But for now, it's like Inzy accesorios in Spanish, INZY accessories.com. And you will find
I'll put that in the notes.
awesome. Yeah, and you can find our jewelry there, and eventually we will have a store in New York, online store.
Brilliant. Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I can't wait to see what you do next, and also good luck with your interior design business. Oh, can't wait to have you back on the podcast to discuss all the other many things that we've experienced and put right to the world.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Camila. That was a really great episode with Camila. We talked about so many different things. I loved it, and I hope that you enjoyed it too. If you felt like you connected with it in any way, please give us a comment, get in touch. I'd love to hear more about this tiny little niche industry that we have in ArcViz, but there's so many people with different experiences, and I just love meeting people with different things to say. I just love working with cool people. Hope you enjoyed it too. If you did, also please like, rate and subscribe. I'd love to grow the community, and see you in 2 weeks' time. Bye.